All right. So we continue our studies today. We've been talking and exploring some themes throughout this text that we can explore for ourselves. I'll be leading a discussion and a contemplation today around the final of the four themes that we are asked to let go in this teaching. So let's explore that. Let's explore those themes. Actually, let's start with our series outline, just for anyone who's joining us new. As I mentioned in our opening section, we are studying the Bhaja Govindam by Adi Shankaracharya. And in this limited series, we will be exploring 8 themes that arise in this text. This text is also known as the Moha Mudgara, and that means the hammer of our delusions. So in addition to being a text which guides us to a greater connection with an understanding of the self, it also breaks apart those things, those beliefs that we have that are keeping us from that knowledge of self. And so in this class, we'll be talking about 4 key ways in which we stay trapped in samsara, or that delusion of the mind, and 4 key ways in which we may find our liberation from that and come closer to Govindam, or closer to that absolute reality of which we are also part of that absolute reality. So if you would like to understand more, I really highly recommend looking at the specific verses for each theme and then rewatching some of those original teachings from Acharya Shunya in her in-depth Bhaja Govindam teachings. All right, so today we are finishing up with our final of the 4 themes that we've been asked to let go, right? And when these things are, what are we letting go from ourselves, from our mind, from our actions, from our habits, and our habitual ways of thinking? These are our delusions, right? These are some of the common ways in which we find ourselves separate, find ourselves separate from our sense of self, separate from God, separate from seeing that reality in others. And today we're going to be exploring the 4th and final theme of this series, that we're letting go. And then we'll start talking about the things that we're enjoying to pick up. What are we going to pick up? So today we're going to be talking about the delusion of our own lusts and senses. And we'll be paying special attention to verses 3, 14, 16, 26, and 28. All right. Let's start with verse 3. And can you bring that up? All right. So on the screen, we see verse 3, and this translates to: do not get drowned in delusion by going wild with passions and lust, by seeing a woman's navel and chest. These are nothing but a modification of the flesh. Fail not to remember this again and again in the mind. All right. Don't drown. Don't drown in these, in our wild passions and our lusts. So, an important thing to remember, you can let that slide down. An important thing to remember about this is perhaps we should all contemplate context. So, in this verse, Adi Shankaracharya was, we understand Bhaja Govindam from our opening stanza, which is Adi Shankaracharya is traveling, and he's traveling with his disciples. He's traveling with his students. So he's on a spiritual journey. He's teaching. He's a guru. He's seeing others, and people are coming to him. He's a wise person. But at this time, it's highly likely that his entire audience of students at that time were probably fairly young men. And as we all have been young once before, if not currently, then we all have experienced the impact and the power of our hormones and our sexual urges and our passions when we're young, right? It seems all encompassing. Who has not experienced the wild leaping of our senses and our fantasies, especially when we're young in the course of lust and sexual passion, right? And we all have at one point. This is part of our youth. I think almost exclusively, everyone has experienced, our senses running away with us and going passionately after another. We see a beautiful, we've seen a beautiful body. We've seen a handsome face or a gorgeous or beautiful breasts, as, as Adi Shankaracharya mentions here. It's important to understand this in the context of a universality, right? So in addition to it's not just you just have to not look at a navel and a breast and be and be unaroused. What it's asking us to do is look at our senses, see where they are running away with us more broadly. So, regardless of gender or sexual preference, whatever body you have and whatever bodies you are attracted to, this is telling us that our unregulated lusts and passions and desires, they can cause us to lose our discernment, right? They can cause us to fall into a delusion, right? There's lots of delusions that can happen when we let our senses go running away with us, taking us somewhere where our intellect or our higher awareness may not have intended us to go. What are some of the delusions that can happen when we allow this to happen? When we allow and even extending past maybe the solely sexual connotations of it. Has anyone here in our live audience, has anyone here experienced maybe meeting a person and have you found your mind creating a story instantly about that person? Positive, dramatically so. We might have a crush. Has anyone here? I see a lot of not. Yes, we've all had crushes before. Yes. And I could feel it now, that sense of that, and there's a pleasure there, right? Even of thinking about this capacity. Is there something about for me as I'm aging, there's a part of my youth that I'm remembering, this wild and unregulated, and it felt free, right? And we're seeking freedom all the time. This is what our higher self is seeking, and there's a freedom that comes within that. Does anybody, you can share in the chat if you can, conjure up those feelings even now. One person, Jada, it reminds her of the celebrity crush idea, right? That we draw these stories, right? We create entire stories, entire worlds around another body. And it can only be about the body in that capacity, right? We don't know them. We don't know their personality. Do we see them instantly as Atman? Or instantly as the higher self in that moment? No, what are we seeing? We're seeing the body. We're identifying with this physical form. Yeah. So this is an important guideline for us, this verse. It helps us to understand that we are really prone, all of us. And at different stages of our life, it's easier and harder to be this way. But all of us are prone to attach to a body, to other people's bodies, to our own bodies, to what those bodies can give back to us. This is where the senses come in this capacity, right? How we how we confuse, and this is a contemplation I want all of us to continue on through all of this class and then also on your own. What is this connection for you between your senses and the satisfaction that those senses give to the body, and where that can lead to an inner delusion, where that can lead to a confusion about who and what we are engaging with, right? Yeah. So this is This is an important reminder. It's so easy to confuse the body with the Atman when we're not in that higher discipline of conscious awareness, right? We can confuse the flesh with the self. We confuse our sensory gratification with reality, right? But this body decays and it ages. And even that body that we saw that was so beautiful, maybe in the flush of youth, that body is also going to age and decay. And however sexy or perfect, however attributes we project onto that body, as though that body and that sensory gratification, as though that was going to fulfill us, right? This is where the senses become an important tool to understand how we are seeing ourselves as separate or connected. What is that? What are our senses doing for us? Are our senses gratifying us? That's the belief, right? That our senses are going to gratify us, they're going to fulfill us, that there's something that needs to be fulfilled. And right there is the crux of the confusion of separation. When we allow our senses to run amok, what's happening? What is happening when those senses are running amok? What are those senses doing? Are they reaching out? They're grasping, right? They're grasping and they're bringing closer experience, bringing closer something. And why are they bringing it closer? Because we feel, our personality selves feel that it's going to bring us something. This is an important delusion, an important confusion to really check in on. This is why it's really important to pay attention to what the senses are doing and what our ego mind thinks is happening when it allows them to just be in a constant state of need of fulfillment. Ultimately, these bodies that we're coveting, these bodies that we're seeking are still made up of the seven same tissues. That outer form is still made up of, Acharya Shunya was speaking on, there's texts that talk about the gross aspects of those tissues, that beautiful woman with her lovely breasts and her beautiful face and her navel, is also a collection of the sapta dhatus, or the seven tissues. And that means that she and he and all of us are still filled up of blood and pus and stool, and we're still just meat sacks. There's another text that essentially calls us meat, and when we say this mortification of the flesh is a very fleshy flesh. He means this. He means literally the tissues. So are those tissues that we're seeking fulfillment from, are those permanent? Or will we, if we held on so tightly to those tissues, what would be left? Well, the tissues die, the tissues go, the tissues are but a life cycle that continues on and on. And yet here we are, grasping, creating entire worlds, creating entire stories, entire samsaras around our relationship and experience with the tissues, right? Who wants that? If we really were paying attention, would we want that? No, I see some no, no, we don't want that. Please feel free to chime up in the chat if you have anything you want to add to this and any contemplations that are coming up, and we'll explore this too. And so when we project these qualities onto the body, we can find ourselves lost in a delusion. And this goes back to some of the earlier teachings, which is that anytime that we pursue the impermanent, it inevitably leads to dukkha, or sorrow. We think we're going to get pleasure. We think we're going to get sukha. We think that temporary pleasure will give us permanent happiness. And does it? No, it does not. No. Yeah. All right. So specifically lust itself, we've talked about trishnas. This is a kind of a sexual trishna, or a deep thirst, a deep seeking, a deep longing, and lust can lead to a lot of problems. So specifically, while we're exploring all senses and the way that the senses work for all of us and how we need to rein in those senses, as someone who is devoted to a deeper knowledge of self, as someone who is seeking Govindam, is seeking the eternal. We are enjoined, and we'll get into this in the next class, we are enjoined to discipline the senses, to rein in those senses. But lust specifically is mentioned because it is responsible for a lot of adharmic or unethical behavior. And so lust, a kind of a lust where we do not see the original person, where we do not see that person as a self, as an aspect of Brahman, Ishvara, Govindam. What can happen? We can start to objectify, and then we're not looking at a person. We're not looking at an individual. We're looking at something that we can exercise our own sensory pleasures onto and receive from. And so that kind of sexual trishna can never be fulfilled, because trishnas can't be fulfilled. We have to understand that that deep longing is, if we keep pursuing it, it can trap us. And we are exploring a text that's helping us to free ourselves. And so lust can lead to violating another person, which can, because you don't see Govindam in that other person. And then you can justify all sorts of actions that can support your sensory desires. And there you go, lost again. And now you may have done something that violated another person. But it can also, for those of us who are seeking to know the self, for those of us who are on an inner spiritual journey to self-realization, engaging in our lusts, and our unbridled passions, in our greedy senses in general, can lead us into something that's called pradnya prad, and that's a crime against our own inner wisdom. And this is what Adi Shankaracharya is warning us against and telling us, don't violate your inner wisdom. You think that this one person or this one thing or this sensory gratification, it is such a trap because it will cause you to go against your own inner wisdom. What does that mean? It means we violate our own boundaries, our own ethical boundaries, our own physical boundaries, our own relationship boundaries, our own moral boundaries. And so if we find ourselves compromising our values and our disciplines in many ways, um, that's going to limit ourselves. That's going to limit us, and it's going to put us on that different path. Rather than being on a path of Shreyas, moving closer to self-realization, moving closer to Govindam, it will set us firmly on a path of prayas, moving into the world, moving into a place in which we are not aware of that connection. And we can find ourselves in more and more higher and higher stakes of delusion, in which it's very easy to compound the effect and then find ourselves lost, really, and that we're lost and far away from where we meant to be. So we have to look at the ways in which these kind of delusional engagements are limiting ourselves. They can limit our health, our energy, our choices, how we spend our time. Have any of you, either live or watching this recording, have any of you found yourself compromising yourself and your values, or even your word, in pursuit of another person, in pursuit of another body? This is a no judgment zone. We sometimes that is not necessarily I would say by the time that you are going deep into these kinds of studies, it may not always be in relationship to You're probably not violating really in really very obvious, dramatically adharmic ways that are very obvious, but perhaps you're violating your own inner wisdom. And that is something that I think where have you compromised yourself or your pursuit of your inner knowingness? Are there ways in which you've compromised this path or this journey for yourself in pursuit of any kind of sexual or sensual experience? And sometimes those aren't, we're going to talk about some of those today of like, there's some of those sensory experiences. Maybe it's not another person's body, but maybe it's something else. Yeah. We have one share. Devi Priya says, this verse really helped me with detaching from relationships, even when it wasn't a sexual relationship. When I found myself clinging to others in my life, I did think of them as a meat sack and skin, covering all the tissues and the organs, and the intensity of my clinging decreased, and I felt more connected to my whole self. If they're simply a meat sack, then the intensity that I feel around them is about me and my clinging, not them. This helps me to focus back on my own work, to connect to Atman and to detach. All right. And so I want to clarify too, part of what we are enjoying to look at here, and we'll see more and more that as we talked in the last class about relationships, we specifically in our lineage are a grahasta lineage, and that means we're a householder lineage. We engage in the world, right? We are not escaping the world, but we have to find ways in which we can engage in the world in such a way that we are not attaching to so firmly. And so these, when we look at our senses, like Devi Priya said, can I look at these engagements and my sensory fulfillment needs, and can I see, am I attaching to that self in all? Am I attaching to this outer experience of another person, another sensory fulfillment experience, another pleasure? When we look to see, it's not that there isn't, I don't want to encourage anyone who doesn't have maybe this sense of where we haven't yet talked about so much of what we might attach to. And what we might attach to is that which is impermanent in all of us, or that which is permanent in all of us. And this is saying it's so easy to attach to what is impermanent and think that we've held on to something good. And so hold gently these things. Don't hold it all, and just realize, there's my senses. They want something. There's something they're grasping, they're thirsting for, they want. I see that. I see what it wants. I see that I can create a whole story in my mind about what this sensory pleasure will give me. And I don't have to engage so much with that. Instead, let me step back. Let me experience some disciplines. And the very first thing that we'll talk about in the next class is how we begin to step back and create some of this space. And so, first things first, if you're wildly attaching to the next thing, the next taste, and the next person, the next body, and um, the next, any of the next sensory experience, then this verse is telling us, wait, don't do it. It's like, come on, stop. Don't do this. You're headed off a cliff. Please wait up. Use your senses wisely, right? Use them with intellect and discernment, and keep remembering the self within. We can waste an entire lifetime in this decaying body, in your decaying body. You can waste this whole lifetime in this physical body and in this pursuit of the senses. And I remember a quote that Acharya Shunya said. She said, when we are not in viveka, we become estranged from our path. And the senses are what hijack us from that journey, right? So for feeling separate, this sensory management is the first place to start. Really clue in, because these senses, they're fundamental. That's how we engage with this outside world. But they are also a very easy way to hijack our higher consciousness. And there's a lot, by the way, in today's world that is incredibly stimulating and incredibly hijacking of those senses, right? There's many ways, and we'll keep talking about it today. There's many ways in which our senses, not just lust for another body, but there's many ways in which our greed of the senses, our engaging in letting those senses just roam unchecked, is being nurtured by our outer environment and how it's disrupting that connection to self and how we're choosing to disrupt it. And so here we're asked to don't, first of all, stop choosing to disrupt that connection. You may still have things that disrupt it. Life does happen, but stop actively choosing it. Pull it in. Where are you being engaged in your senses in a way that maybe you're not exerting as much control over, or maybe you're finding a distraction, or maybe you're finding a pleasure or a relief? All right. And we have another share. Pragya shares that her Pradnya Parad relates to eating foods that I know will aggravate my body, but my senses become attached to the thought of bread or cake, etc. And then Sakshi shares that her would be a glass or two of some delicious wine, even though as I age, wine can give me headaches. Awful. Yes, food is a lust. I mean, right? And you can see this, like it's such a seemingly innocuous way in which we can satisfy our senses, in which we can treat yourself, right? How are we treating ourselves? And is it a treat? Is it a treat? I think that is an important contemplation. All right. Anyone else wants to share? You're welcome to. Yeah, so we've brought up some other things in which we can lust after, which we perhaps are lusting after, and I think that makes sense as our audience may not be made up of young men on the cusp of adulthood, seeking to know themselves, but also being torn by their bodily urges. But we also have, there's a whole phrase that we use for when those sensory desires reemerge, right? What's that called? A midlife crisis, right? We have a whole thing of like, oh, pop, we thought we were through them, and then more sensory urges. And now, and there's an entire awareness culturally about what could happen. Oh, people go off the deep end, they buy a car, they have an affair, they do this. What is that? What is that but allowing our senses to run away with us? And this speaks to something that may come up in the next two verses. So let's pull up verse 14. All right. Verse 14. There are many who go with matted locks, many who have clean shaven heads, many whose hairs have been plucked out. Some are clothed in orange, yet others in various colors, all just for a livelihood. Seeing truth revealed before them, still the foolish ones see it not. What is this telling us? Well, to me, it tells us that looking spiritual is not the same as being spiritual. That or rather, looking spiritual is not the same as being connected to the truth of the self. Okay, so we don't know what spiritual is. It's got a lot of cultural significance of I'm spiritual but not religious. And so let us speak to the truth of these teachings, which is that in the era of Adi Shankaracharya and his disciples, that there were these wandering sadhus, these wandering mendicants, and you can still to this day go to India and see these people that look very distinguished, or they look very wild, or they have a very cultivated appearance. And that appearance, in this case, was to go with matted locks or shaved heads. Matted locks as an outward sign, and the shaved head or the wearing of a uniform, in this case, in the orange, the saffron robes. But all of this is pointing to having the trappings, having the trappings of spiritual enlightenment or the trappings of wisdom, and how that isn't, it's pointing out that, like, again, our senses can be telling us something. We may seek that look in someone else. We may seek these visual cues. We may see someone, and again, we're creating a whole story, right? As soon as we see these trappings, and in the modern age, it may be the robes of a priest, it may be the suit and tie of the megachurch leader. It may be in yoga circles in the West, right? It's if you're wearing white, you must be this. Or if you are extremely flexible, then you're somehow enlightened, right? Well, is this true? Well, even 1,000+ years ago, there were people who thought, you know what? I can make this look, I can look this way, and I can develop students, and I can, this is speaking to the kind of like also that false prophet thing, right? Um, and how easy it is. Again, this is about senses. We're bringing it back to the senses. What are our senses telling us? And is it telling us truth? And if we are that person, if we are that person who has put on the trappings of wisdom, and yet is, and the last line says, seeing truth revealed before them, still the foolish ones see it not. This is an inner knowing, an inner seeing. It is not based on, wisdom does not come from the way that we look. It doesn't come from the way that we sound, the way that we smell if we're anointed with oils, the way that, it doesn't come from the way that our bodies are expressing themselves. And yet, and yet, we constantly seek outwards for those visual cues, those sensory cues, those sound cues, those experiences, those all of the senses that tell us, oh, this equals that. And what we're asked to do here is to see that we may be making judgments that are not actually based in truth. And so, what can we know? What do we know? And where do we put our focus? Are we attaching ourselves to people that are just doing this just to fulfill a livelihood? It's not wrong to fulfill a livelihood, but if we are attaching our senses, our wish fulfillment, our dreams, our trishnas onto another body because that body looks a certain way, because we've exoticized that body, that happens a lot in the modern era. If we are seeking, if we're seeking a wisdom we don't yet feel for ourselves, we may attach ourselves to things that are not actually wise, that are more foolish, that even if you put the truth in front of them, they will not see. So paying attention to how we attach to our sensory cues, how we create stories about other bodies, however subtle, pay attention to that. What confers authority in terms of consciousness? And here, what confers authority is not the robes, it's not the hair, it's not it's not the lack of hair, it's not the outward signs of renunciation. What confers authority is the wisdom of the self. And this is important because as we look to further our understanding of the self, we're asked to go find and be in the company of wise people. So if we're still attaching to, well, this person looks wise, they're holding all the cards of, oh, this must be, it's checking all of my boxes of what a wise person looks like. But are they really? Would they know the truth of the self if presented right in front of them? So we're asked to have a deeper discernment, have a deeper discernment. Yeah. We have some shares. Let's see. Devi Priya says, and this is in reference to that last verse, living with a young man. It's been interesting to see just how this phase involves so much intense joy and then intense despair. Yes, that intensity of the sensory experience and sensory response, right? There's an intensity that comes with youth that we can get drowned in that delusion. We can go wild with our passions and lusts. It's very obvious in our youth. There are pressures, there's biological pressures, and another verse in this text where Adi Shankaracharya talks about the stages of life and what commonly distracts us. In youth, we're distracted with play. In the middle of our life, we are distracted with passion. We are distracted with that pressure of lust, and there is an upswing in those pressures. And then in our later ages, we're distracted by worry, and yet hardly anyone focuses on the Param Brahman. So again, there is this intensity of experience that comes from sensory fulfillment at different stages of our life, but it's possible for everyone, regardless of how old, to get caught in these senses. Zaina says, she shares, she recently bought a cute short dress and was having doubts about wearing it because of my age and my spiritual path. I was thinking of the way our teacher dresses and momentarily felt a pressure to replicate that. Yeah, we'll talk about that in the next verse, but this idea of like just paying attention to what what we feel like we have to, part of this idea that we're really going to be diving into around vairagyam, or vairagyam is what we let go, and how we detach or disassociate from the impermanent, so that we can be more aware of what is real, what is permanent, and that is this Govindam. But to have a false renunciation, which is pressured by again, our delusions of what makes us pure, what makes us wise, it's a good thing to pay attention to that, because when you naturally want to let something go, it's because you understand there's an importance to that higher self-realization. But to do it out of, we want to look a certain way or be a certain way, and we see how easy it is, and it's not bad or wrong. It's just something to be aware of like, oh, I want to, I see that what I see is the wisdom, what I feel is the wisdom, and I want to replicate that. And what we're taught is that if we replicate the way that we look, if we mortify the flesh, if we change how we look or appear or, present ourselves, then perhaps we can grab onto some of that wisdom. So what we're asked to do here is say, wait, pause, time out. What is it that I really want? What is it that I'm hoping to get with these senses going out and seeking fulfillment and gratifying? Can we connect to what it is that I really want? And what I hear in that, and I think Zaina speaks for all of us, is what I want is the wisdom that I receive, that I experience from the teacher. What I want is to know the self. What I want is to I want Bhaja Govindam. I want to connect and appeal to Govindam. And yes, our ego wants shortcuts all the time. And sometimes without our even being aware of it. Oh, if I wear that, there's classic things. You'll see some of the TV gurus will have the most insanely large Rudraksha beads because the larger the Rudraksha, the more wise you are, right? The more, the more ornate the rosary beads, the more pious one is. It happens everywhere. We can conflate these things, and it's great to pay attention to even the subtle ways in which our mind is allowing us to go off on a tangent, or can we come back to self? Yes, and Zaina next shares also, she's thinking about people in community who I've met that have all the trappings of authority and wisdom or leadership. They have resources, job title, visibility, but once looking closely, have found so much destructive behavior. Yes, and in all communities, all religious communities, all spiritual communities, you will see this come again and again. And we can, this hurrying too fast towards the an outer expression of a discipline that is not innermost felt or experienced is a dangerous path, and it can lead to significant violations. We see this in terms of early celibacy that has gone wrong, where people have said, "Oh, I'm going to be celibate," and they're not able to manage that. They're just suppressing or repressing. It's not coming from a natural urge. Again, when we talk even about lust, there are healthful ways, there are dharmic ways, there are there are ways in which we can experience. I mean, the Kama Sutra was a beautiful treatise on how to experience pleasure in a healthful way within the context of consent and agreement and relationship. And so, as people that are both spiritually oriented towards the knowledge of the self and also engaging in everyday reality, everyday relationship, we aren't worried too much about not, it's not about I will have no sex, I will have no sugar, I will have no, these strong no's without context and without inner awareness of why can lead to kind of a rebound effect of because it's not connected to intellect, it's not connected to higher knowledge. We can only box our ego in so much without connecting to self before those senses may explode. And then you do get drowned in delusion, right? Yeah. So let's wake up and pay attention to what is real and eternal and what is another illusion. This whole world is made of delusions. We have to start discerning between what is lasting and what is temporary, what is meaningful and what is speaking or looking like truth, but who wouldn't recognize it even if it slapped it up or her upside the head. So beware false prophets, um, beware of what looks truthful and yet isn't, and cultivate that inner discernment. And this text will help you to cultivate some of that inner discernment. And there are some other teachings that will also do that. And this is one of the beautiful things about the Bhagavad Gita teachings and the Karma Yoga teachings that Acharya Shunya is going to begin in June of 2025 of this year, because it helps to guide us. These karma yoga teachings will help to guide us on how to make these discernments and what is real and really dive into that. So, but Bhaja Govindam tells us first off, do this and don't do that. So let's go on to verse 16. Look, behold, there lies the man who sits warming up his body with the fire in front and the sun at the back. At night, he curls up the body to keep out of the cold. He eats his beggar's food from the bowl of his hand, and he sleeps beneath the tree. Still in his heart, he is a wretched puppet at the hands of passions. So here's someone who, this verse is saying, here's someone who they look like they're not in mindless pursuit of the senses, right? They've denied themselves, they've practiced austerities, they're not letting their lusts run wild, they're suffering, right? They're out in the cold, they're eating small amounts, whatever they can get from others. Um, does that suffering bring them closer to self-realization? Does that suffering bring automatically does suffering or denying ourselves bring us closer to self-awareness? Is that true? Can anybody chime in on the chat? No? Yeah. I see nodding heads. I see no's in a lot of you saying no. Yeah, definitely no. All right. So all these things without awareness of our motivations, without awareness of why we are doing them, and without awareness of connection to self, these actions that we can take, right? These sadhanas, right? This person is experiencing, they're practicing deep sadhana. They've stepped away from the world. They don't have a house. They barely have clothes. They barely have food. And yet all of these things could be trappings of the ego if you don't have a connection to what is inner satisfaction, that inner tushtaha, that inner satiety that comes from knowing the self and knowing Govindam. Yeah. Yeah. So all of these are trappings of the ego, and yet here this person is, he looks all these ways and he still remains a puppet to his passions. What does it mean to be a puppet to your passion at the hands of passion? It means you're out of control, right? The you of you is not in control. Something else is leading, something else is moving your strings. The unreined senses. What do we say when we say unreined? That comes from the Bhagavad Gita, and we're taught to, where if the higher intellect is the charioteer who's pulling back the wild horses of the senses. It's an analogy that the senses, if they are unchecked, want to seek. That's their nature. Their nature is to go outward, seek sensation in all kinds and bring it back for the experiencer, that one who experiences. If no one's holding those reins, if your higher self isn't holding the reins, if your higher awareness, rather, your buddhi isn't holding the reins, then what's going to happen is you have no control over what's coming back to you, and you have no control over what you're receiving. So every time we don't pay attention to, like, there's many ways in which, again, where are our senses being hijacked, and where are we sort of hanging on? We think we're controlling the senses by denial, but are we really managing those senses just by is refusal to allow anything in the same as understanding why we are separating gently from those things. All right, we have a few shares. Pragya says it seems that suffering or pain makes the attachment to samsara stronger and harder to connect with Govindam. Is that true? I don't know that it has to. In fact, so many times suffering brings us into, it's because I think both sukha and dukkha are on a continuum of experience within the impermanent, right? And so they all, both pleasure and pain, um, the pursuit of satisfaction, coming closer to, and moving farther away from raga and dvesha, right? Those things that we are attracted to and those things we are averse to. Both of them have their limitations, right? Both of these things, either if we're running away from things or if we're coming close to things, they both have their limitations. I don't think that either is required if we are connected to self, right? We don't, and that's the idea, is that those things may come. Things that are unpleasant or pleasant may come in our life. And if we understand what is real, then we can observe these things, we can experience these things with our body and our senses, and yet we still have some separation or some awareness. But sometimes a little dukkha, a little dissatisfaction, a little sorrow hones our awareness, right? Just as sometimes a little pleasure can remind us of what we're grateful for or what we connect with. But I think, I don't know, what do you all think? Does anyone else have any ideas on that pain? Does it bring us closer or farther away from does it make it harder to connect with Govindam? Certainly, physical pain can make it very difficult to. I'm experiencing this in my own life recently. This experience of physical pain can also hijack the senses, and it's important to both be present for the physical experience. So we're all having a physical experience, sometimes pleasant, sometimes unpleasant, but can we maintain some sense of our self to know that this also will pass? Is it harder to do in pain or harder to do in pleasure? And I think that's a moving target. I think both can be difficult. Yeah. So we have a few shares around that. And thank you, Pragya, for putting that out there. I appreciate that. All right. Kalyani shares that I remember Acharya Shunya saying in the context of this, verse 16, that the person accepting the food that they've been given are thinking of, is the person accepting the food they've been given, or are they thinking about how much they will receive and wishing they had received more? Yeah, so that's a way that as a guidance into how can we experience what comes in. Are we doing it with an understanding? Why are we limiting ourselves? If we want more, why would we limit ourselves in this way? Why would we refuse to create or receive? And yet, so if we're holding on to that, I want more, 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 and yet we put ourselves in an environment or an experience in which we've denied ourselves that more. And then what happens? We start resenting. Anger comes up, resentment. And is that anger and resentment bringing us closer or farther from Govindam? Yeah. To speak to what Pragya just shared as well. Oh, yeah. Pragya shares, yes. She was also thinking more of it's harder to meditate when her mind is occupied with, for example, a headache or flu. Yeah, these are difficult. And I think too, sometimes it's harder to be in that part of ourselves which intellectually is more in discernment, and there does come a space of I'll share just for myself of just can I just be present? Can I just be present? And that is often difficult, very difficult, but that's the requirement I ask of myself, is not to try and meditate so much if I'm in that position, but can I just be present with what is? And that doesn't mean I like it, doesn't mean I want it, but can I also be present in that? And I think that's a great and worthy goal. When you're occupied with a headache or a flu, can be gentle with yourself and what your intellect is asking you to do, even in that moment. But just there's a present awareness that is beyond even that intellect. Victoria shares it. She thinks it depends on whether we're connected to the why of we're suffering. Yeah, are we creating stories around that suffering? David shares attachment to suffering or the deserving of suffering seems to happen sometime. Yes. Yeah, again, we can also be attached. We're not just attached to the things that give us pleasure. We're also equally attached to avoiding pain or our stories. We can create these. What are the delusions that we create? There are stories around ourselves and our experience. All right. So Cheers shares, I think avoiding to feel the suffering and not processing it or intellectualizing it is more of a spiritual bypass. And that can increase the ultimate attachment to that suffering or our role in that suffering more than letting it pass through us while having bhakti or faith and faith in Govindam. Right. Yeah. So these are some of the more subtle ways in which, and I think it's important as in this audience or studentship to look to kind of some of those subtle ways in which we are probably not grossly violating Dharma at this stage, well, I would hope, but where we are subtly kind of maybe in that spiritual bypassing experience or in that in that desire to move past without seeing it also for what it is. Yeah. Victoria shares, if I go into a martyr mentality, then I'm in my ego. If I'm limiting something, I need to be connected to the why. It must be a letting go rather than a rigid going out without something. Remind myself why I am passing on the glass of wine or the next piece of chocolate. Yes. And so what she's describing here is the process by which mananam or contemplation leads to vivekaha or discernment. And then within that discernment, what are we discerning? We're discerning what is real and what is unreal, what is lasting and what is permanent, and what will bring us closer to the permanent Govindam and what will bring us farther away from. So in the context of that sensory pleasure, is it going to bring us closer to our innermost self and our inner sattva, our inner calm, steady state, our inner our inner state of balance, or is it going to bring us farther away from? And then naturally, once that discernment happens, we're promised that if we can really understand that, if we can really hone that discernment, that viveka, and this is what these things that we're letting go, it's guiding us on what to discern and where we might find ourselves not discerning properly. If we can do that, then what happens naturally is something called vairagyam. And vairagyam is that natural disassociation from what is not real, what is impermanent, from all of these things that cause more attachments and more delusions. So this text is a text on vairagyam. It's a text on what we can naturally let go. And what we're guided through with these verses is don't be fooled in letting go of things without discernment, right? It's if you're pushing things away without understanding why, like all of you have said now, everyone's chiming in, yes, the why is important. So the understanding the why is going to give us the ability to actually truly let things go and not pick it up again. So we're in a process of discernment. We're in this process of understanding. And naturally, we are promised that we will, if we stay on this path and we don't get distracted and we allow ourselves to really look at what's motivating us, what's leading us, or what we're leading, then we'll start to come to a natural state of vairagyam. Yeah. One final share for this, and Zanis shares, I've been feeling a little lonely and wanting to connect with people. I was invited to a party last night and felt like maybe I was rejecting an opportunity for connection or depriving myself. But now I'm realizing that the party would have included a lot of drinking and other substances. It felt like I was rejecting it and being ungrateful, but now I see why I didn't go. Yeah, yeah. Parties aren't bad. Even people drinking around you isn't bad. It's fine. It's those are the choices, but you will find on this path as you learn more. And this is again, you are naturally, bravo, high five. You are choosing, practicing discernment. You are practicing discernment. And what we saw right there was it was a discernment not in rejecting other people. You were discerning for yourself what's going to bring you closer to where you want to be on a journey to self-realization, and what would bring you farther apart. Again, we don't avoid the world, we don't push away the world, but there are times where naturally we want, and it's also not wrong. And I want to encourage all of us. This is what this text is also saying. It is not wrong to want to be in the company of others. Which others are we being in the company of? And this is so important in terms of, find your people, find your satsang, find your company of wise people. And what are wise people? They're people that are also contemplating what of the senses, what of our relationships, what of our attachments, what of our worldly pursuits, what do we want to kind of just gently let go, and what do we want to bring closer? So it's good to be in community with you, in a satsang, in a community of wise people together. And that is important, as Adi Shankaracharya and his students all reiterated. Yeah. All right, let's move on to verse 26. So here we're guided. Give up lust, anger, infatuation, and greed. Ponder over your real nature. Fools are they who are blind to the self. Cast into hell, they suffer there endlessly. When we look at this, not through the lens of the Abrahamic religions and their understandings of hell as another place, what is this? What does this verse tell us? What does this verse tell us? Giving up our this is a pretty stern command. This is one of those hammers, right? Give it up. Boom. Here's the hammer. Give up lust, anger, infatuation, and greed. All of those are false. All of, and many of them are things that they feel right to the senses, right? They're extreme emotional. There's a lot of emotional feedback we get from engaging in lust, engaging in anger, engaging in that infatuation with the other, that creation of the story, and even engaging in greed, pulling more things, right? There is a feedback there. There's an emotional feedback. It feels good to the ego. And then if you're someone who's on a path of dharma or wanting to do right, if you're not paying attention, if you are not clear of your own motivations, someone in Marika shares in the chat the why. If you're not engaging in an understanding of your why, we can attach piety to these things, right? I deserve that. It was mine. My anger is righteous. We can attach a whole lot of significance to these because there is there's a lot of juicy, tasty feedback loop that comes from intense emotions. Um, has anyone found themselves caught up in their intense sensory experience of their emotions? Yeah, I see nodding heads. Yeah, there is that feedback loop in the body, right? And it feels good. It feels like, because there's a sensory feedback there. It feels like we're getting a lot, right? Our blood is right, our blood's pumping, our heart's racing. And even when we're even in anger, sometimes it feels good because there's a lot of sensory feedback. We get a lot of like, and I can really lose my mind with this. I can really lose my awareness in this. And there's a trap, and we're told unequivocally, give it up. You think it's giving you something. You think it's feeding you something. That's the feedback loop. That's a sensory part of this. We think it's something that we need. We think it's something that we deserve. We can easily get into a loop of we can get into that egoic loop. This is how samsaric, we keep recreating a harder and harder, more and more bonds to this reality by those intense sensory feedbacks, right? We lay it down, those intense sensory experiences, we lay down as deep memories. They quickly go into our memory. They can form deeper bonds and deeper feedback loops, which might be called samskaras, right? Or um, heightened emotion leads to more memory, right? Pragya, you're a neuroscientist. I know that you can probably explain some of that as well, maybe in the forum you'd like to share. But the more intense our sensory experiences and the more intense our emotional connections to those sensory experiences, the more memories are formed. And the more that we then attach, and this is why we're constantly having to remind ourselves of who we are. And so the more we engage in intense experiences, the more memories we kind of, are those memories truthful? Are they real? Are they permanent? Or are we recreating firmer and firmer layers blocking us from our self-awareness? This is a hammer. Give it up. I don't want to give it up. Oh, but that felt good. Oh, but what if I meet someone? Or oh, what are all the ways? What are all the ways in which we may find ourselves kind of resisting? Does anybody kind of want to resist that? Like, but do I have to give it up forever? Do I have to give it up permanently? What's it telling us? Don't be a fool. Fools are those who are blind to the self. And so this is these kind of engagements, these kind of choosing to reinforce these feelings and these intense emotions and these sensory experiences that lay down false beliefs and attachments and bonds. We become more bound to this material world, more bound to these experiences. Yeah, Pragya shares the brain and the memory definitely operates on strength and emotional salience, adds even more force. Yeah. So ponder your real nature. When these moments come up, and this is where sadhana or discipline is important, because when we have a practice, a regular practice, this isn't a denial of anything, but a regular practice of pondering our real nature, of reminding that brings new memories, it brings new awareness, and we can start to create new pathways that are reminding us then. And many of us have had the experience of of changing our habituated beliefs through practice, through discipline. You may have been a smoker at one point and thought you were going to be a smoker forever, and yet you changed that, and now you are no longer a smoker. And if you've had that experience, even maybe even the thought of it kind of grosses you out now. How could I ever have gone down that path? This is true of it's possible. It's possible through regular practice. This isn't denying the senses. Like we're not saying that that sense never happened and we never wanted it, but we're practicing a different way. And in this way, this is also part of how and why being in community and of right community is important, because we keep reminding ourselves again and again of what's real. Instead of reminding ourselves unconsciously every moment of every day out in the world, which is what's happening. We're reminding ourselves so much 24/7, 365 of our own of unconsciousness, whether we like it or not. Our senses are hijacked, we're drawn this way and that. So give it up. This is one way. If we give up these lust, anger, infatuation, and greed, and what that means, give up our unconscious following those wild horses down that path, and then ponder. How do we do that? We start pondering our real nature again and again and again. If not, fools are those that are blind to this reality and then cast into hell, they suffer there endlessly. So the hell that they and we are cast into is one of our own making. We don't have to look too far to find hell. Hell is our estrangement from self, right? It's right here when we are isolated, alone, estranged from that which actually we cannot be estranged from, but our mind estranges us. Our choices estrange us. Our senses estrange us. And so don't be a fool. Again, as Adi Shankaracharya started with this, don't be a fool. Let this go. And how do we let it go? We just keep pondering, like make time, make effort, make choice to ponder the nature of reality. And again, right here, this reminder of remember that earlier in the text, why are we doing this? Because at the moment of death, what we are thinking about, not even like the way that we think, those memories that are most impressed upon our mind are what we carry forward, and that's where we go. And so in this text, we're being asked to wake up. It was originally told to an elderly man who was doing wonderful things with Sanskrit grammar, but he wasn't waking up. And for him, that time was immediate and palpable. But the reality is for all of us, that should be immediate and palpable. We do not know the moment of death. And so, what are we asked to do? If you want to know God, if you want to know the self, if you want to know Govindam, turn your head again and again, turn your actions, turn your choices to that again and again. Yeah. Because we don't know when that final moment will be. Come back to self, come back to Govindam. And also come back to that part of us that never needs fulfillment, right? What are our senses doing? They're seeking fulfillment. They're seeking something. They're seeking to fulfill our overactive mind that's engaged with wanting more and more and more, this Trishna, wanting more and more and more. And so we're asked here to just to realize there's something that those senses can never provide you, can never provide me. There's something real and whole. And so we think, our mind thinks, and our senses lead us down one path, and we're just asked to like just let it go for now. Come back, ponder on your relationship, ponder on your relationship to self. Don't be a fool. This hell that you're in may be a hell of your own making. Um, yeah. All right. So that leads us finally to this verse 28. Yum, 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 yum. Yes, the picture here is a woman eating a whole bunch of food, delightfully enjoying it. He who yields to lust for pleasures leaves his body a prey to disease. Though death brings an end to everything, man does not give up the sinful path. Sin in this context, and always in a Vedic context, is not sin in the way that sort of Christian understanding of sin as in a punishable offense. It's not about punitive. Sin is when we go against our inner wisdom, and that inner knowledge that comes to us from Govindam, that comes to us from our connection, our deep connection to a higher truth. And so, what is, when we talk about and when we learn about this sinful path is the one that takes us away from self-realization. It's the one that takes us away. It's those choices that lead us farther and farther from our understanding of self. And what's the problem with following the lure of the senses in excess? We see here not only can it lead our mind astray, it can also lead our physical body astray. What happens when we pursue pleasures not with a dharmic stance, not with a measured understanding of what we're doing and why we're doing it? This excess of passions without regard. Um, Ultimately, we're going to get the fruit of all of our choices, this karma pala, the fruit of our actions. And immediately in this one physical life, we have many, but in this one physical life, it says it can leave your body prey to disease. So excessively following the senses can lead to illness. We talked about pradnya parad. I think it's interesting when you look at, I think it's the top 9 or 10 diseases that causes of death, at least in the US, probably in the world, I think, but for sure in the US, they're all lifestyle diseases. They are all related to our choices. Now, some things make those choices more or less immediate impact. We can have congenital illnesses. We can also have genetic links to things, but it's really understood now that epigenetics, or the effects of our choices, actually play a really big role in what kind of diseases we experience. And so mindless gratification of the tongue, right? That's a sense. There was a part in Acharya Shunya's teachings where she talked about there's each of the senses is related to an animal. And so there was one, this mindless gratification of the tongue was like fish. Fish can be caught if you feed them, right? So we can be caught, this is to represent that we can be caught by, easily caught by any of our senses. We can be easily trapped and bound by any of our senses. And food right now in the modern world is a big way in which we feed our senses and perhaps mindlessly. And what can that do? It can lead to all sorts of things like weight and excess weight and heart disease and cardiac illnesses and digestive and GI and all these things, right? So we're prey to disease. Sexual lust also, we can not only have the the socio relationship issues that come from that, but we can also experience disease from that. There's not only sexually transmitted diseases, but also an excess of sexual activity can lead to issues. And from an Ayurvedic standpoint, we understand about something called shukra or our sexual tissues, and those can become quite depleted from excessive engagement with the senses, and ultimately that can affect immunity or ojas. And we see that in many sexually transmitted diseases, also in some immune diseases where we become weakened and our body can't actually can't actually fight off disease anymore. We become prey to that disease. So any overuse of the senses, there's a lot of these overuse of the senses, right? Even our engagement with screens, right? I'm looking at this screen. I've got lights all around me. We've got artificial lights. We're playing on our screens all the time. Are you looking at your phone? Are you looking at your computer? What about with your ears? Are you listening to a lot of loud music? Are you overwhelming your senses? Our right and wrong use of the senses, our overuse or underuse of the senses. This is something that Ayurveda and yoga, both Upasana yoga, both of these Vedic sciences are intimately concerned with, because this is where ill health and the unmanaged mind and body can fall prey to disease. So here Adi Shankaracharya is saying, yes, this is if you yield to this lust for pleasure, and this can come in many ways, not just sexual, but if you yield to allowing your senses to kind of run away with you, you can become prey to disease. Death brings an end to everything in this physical body, right? So we know that our time is limited, and yet knowing that, all of us continue to engage our senses in ways that are perhaps unhealthy for us, that we know are unhealthy for us. That tasty meal that we ate just the extra bite of. What are we seeking? We're seeking satiety. We're seeking externally some kind of fulfillment. And what we're asked to look at, and what the hammer is coming home now, is it really bringing you satisfaction? Is all of this bringing you fulfillment? There's always going to be another desire for all of these worldly attachments we've been talking about. This is why we're letting all of them go. All of these worldly attachments, all of these sensory and relationship attachments, these pursuit of wealth, all of these attachments, they're all bringing us, the more we engage with them, the more we come closer to the world, and the more we feel bound, and the more we feel stuck. So let's go to our final contemplation, these last moments. And I want to encourage everyone to sit with this, and we could sit with it for just a couple minutes. And then also, I'd love it if people would, we can share at the end of this class, but also in our community forum on the Vedic Study Circle. We have an ongoing community forum, and we talk about these contemplations and these understandings. So right now, let's consider this contemplation. Endless gratification of our senses, our desires, our lusts, our greed, they inevitably lead to dukkha or sorrow. Instead of providing abiding pleasure, these pursuits leave us unfulfilled and compulsively seeking more. So let's think about what is the difference between sense awareness and an unhealthy use of the senses? Are there areas in your life that you find that you're compulsively seeking sensory stimulation? And how does this affect your thoughts, your mind? And where is this sense seeking leading you? Let's contemplate that for a couple minutes. And then I would love if you'd share in the chat, or you can share by raising your hand. Let's take 2 minutes on that. All right. Part of the reason why I just wanted to give a little time for this is because I like to encourage that first thought. Like there is an inner knowing. Um, I think that can reveal a lot. That first thing, I think most of us know where we're squandering our attention, where we're throwing our senses away, or where we are really sort of mindlessly seeking. Did everybody find it easy to identify one thing, maybe, or maybe multiple things? Yeah, I see some nodding heads. Yeah, yeah. Would anyone like to share their experience? I see Pragya shared that for her, she thinks the difference is in who's in the driver's seat. Are the senses leading, or is the higher connected mind leading? Yeah, so that's a contemplation that we can all begin to really apply. Like even just that awareness of wait, if I know if I know which way I tend to go, if I know which way I'm habituated, if I know which sense I'm habituated to satisfy or seek fulfillment or satisfaction from, then I can start to pay attention to who's leading that, who's paying attention. All right. Does anyone else want to share? Yes, we have a share. I notice a tendency to use my hearing sense to fulfill a sense of connection in a way that leads to more disconnection from myself. Is that a constant scanning? Is that a constant? Maybe you could clarify that a little bit. How does that?
It didn't really make any sense when I just read it back. Um, I think that I try to listen in a group that I've been part of for a long time to feel connected, but actually what people are sharing and what I'm hearing makes me feel more disconnected from myself and
Mhm.
more attached to them and their story.
Right, right. Yeah, our desire to, I think our desire for connection, again, that's that desire for relationship, as a way of seeking what we can find within. It isn't wrong to be in connection with other people, but as you said, if it feels hollow because it's in conjunction with separating from yourself, then that's where the concern will lie. So you feel that hollowness, yes, that she's nodding her head, yes. Wonderful. Yeah, great insight into how, which of these things that we're asked to let go and how we can begin to let go. So just as Devi Priya shared, and earlier as Zaina shared, this idea of checking in with who and what we are and are experiencing in conjunction with community is important, because I think we can get a lot of insight into what are we seeking from others, and whether that is ever going to fulfill us in the way that we think we will be or should be fulfilled by others, right? And if you are actually connected to the self, you can be in a place of greater stability, greater resilience, greater wholeness, so that when you do interact with others, I think we see that really beautifully in our teacher. I think we see someone who is very connected to self, very connected to knowing who and what she is, and what she's really very connected to self. And so to be in her company, instead of her coming down, in the sense of, instead of her seeking outwards into the world and seeking that identity from others, because she's able to hold that space of wholeness, it encourages everyone else around her, all of her students, to also find their space of wholeness, right? So there's a better way that we can this is actually the benefit. Truly, it feels like we're giving something up at first. Like Zaina shared, it feels like we're giving up all of these relationships or these things, which, oh, I can't be around these people, or, oh, as Devi Priya shared, I'm not feeling connected through this community anymore. And yet, the long-term promise is something that if we really are stable in the self, if we really know who we are, then we can be that light. We can be that stable force. We aren't all over the place. Following the senses makes us all over the place. It means our mind is run amok. It means we're not stable. So we can do so much more good in the world. That karma yoga, really, if we can always keep coming back to self, because that's going to stabilize us in a way that nothing impermanent can. There's nothing that's going to keep us stable in a world of shifting sands. And that's what this text is telling us. All of the things we thought we could connect to, they're not stable. So find your inner stability. That stability is within you. All the things outside will change, and yet, whether good or bad, positive or negative, delightful or sorrowful, but if we know who we are, if we connect with Govindam, if we connect with God, if we connected to that part that is never shifting, that has always been there from the moment you opened your eyes at birth and you were connecting with that self, then you are not able to be moved off of your path. You are the stable force. Acharya shares, it reminds me of the discernment between mind and intellect when I think of the difference between endless gratification versus healthy use of the senses. Shunyaji's teachings in the Bhagavad Gita teachings talks about discerning between what is driven by the mind versus relying on our intellect to determine. Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of subtlety in this, but in these teachings, and you can learn a lot more about the ways in which we can do these things, the ways in which we can practice. But Bhaja Govindam is giving us very clear guidelines. Do this, don't do that. Let this go, pick this up. And so it's very helpful. It's not a text which reveals the truth in its entirety. It's a text that prepares us. And so if we're constantly grasping outward, then we are going to find this journey significantly harder than if we just first Shastra or sacred texts, they command, then they enlighten, and then they protect. So this is a commandment text, and we see how it will enlighten and protect us the more and more that we follow these injunctions. We have another share from Kalyani saying there's a difference in the pacing. The calm, considered, disciplined engagement, which comes from discernment, versus the frenetic grasping when the senses are leading. Since I rely on technology for daily living activities because of her disability, it's so easy for me to get caught up in excessive use of it in terms of worldly stimulations. This unchecked overuse leads to thoughts of dissatisfaction and an increasing desire for more stimulation. I recognize this as an invitation to use technology more mindfully, such as consuming content which brings me closer to my true self. Thank you. Yeah, you're not alone. You are absolutely not alone in that, Kalyani. Yeah, it's said right now that the big war in the world right now is actually the war for our attention, because there's so many distractions that by hijacking our attention, then we can be sold anything, we can consume anything, we can be used. This world, these people that are aware and are present, but not dharmically. Yeah, you can be used by virtue of your ignorance of where you are in any given moment internally. Where is your mental state? Where is your sensory state? So it has really important ramifications. It always has, though, right? Here we have, an over 1,000-year-old text telling us that this was a case even then of like it's the nature of our mind in samsara, in the jagat, or in the world. It is the nature of this world, this Maya, to distract us, to tempt us, to seduce us away from our awareness. And so we're invited and commanded to come back, come back, come back. Let go. Um, yes, and sadhana for Kalyani, who just shared, sadhana has made it, or her daily practice, spiritual disciplines and practices, has made it more likely that I remember to take tech breaks just to listen to the birds outside my window. Yes, yes, that's a great point. What are we listening to? This is part of how we rein in our senses, is we intentionally choose where those senses are going. So in a moment, we can choose to be listening to something that leads us farther away, or we can choose to listen to birds outside. We can choose to listen to a satsang, or we can choose to listen to a true crime podcast that talks about a bunch of blood and violence and this and that. Or we can choose, these aren't wrong, but we have choice. So start thinking about how your choices of where you're putting your senses may be affecting your consciousness. Victoria shares, this morning I was reading a piece written by Thich Nhat Hanh, who was speaking about being the pebble at the bottom of the river. All the senses and inputs can swirl around us, but we need to practice being the pebble at the bottom of the river, solid and grounded. She says, I was addicted to sugar and have a sweet tooth. The longer I practice and I'm on this path, the less I am sacrificing not eating sweets. Over time, it just becomes less desirable, especially as I desire being the pebble at the bottom of the river, connected to the self. Yeah. And that's a great expression of what once was a hard line in the sand to give us initial clarity can then become a a um a real choice, a real choice. One time, Acharya Shunya was talking about boundaries, and she talked about how so many times when we're not kind of aware, we do this thing where we create hard external boundaries, but we have mushy internal boundaries, right? So we create all these hard and rigid lines. I won't do this, and I will do that, and I won't do that. But it's actually hiding this inner squishy, no boundary at all in this. And so, what we're asked to do in these teachings with awareness is to build our firm inner boundaries so that we can have softer external boundaries, be more flexible in the way that we relate to the external world, because we're so clear in our internal world of who we are and what we are aligned with. Yeah. So that brings us, I think that would be a great time to bring this teaching and this session to a close. It's been wonderful to be with you. Over the next week, I want you all to contemplate for yourself on what are some of your internal sensory boundaries that you want to bring up, and some of your external ones that you've been maybe violating? What are your internal understandings that you have kind of been pushing to a side, maybe even knowing that they weren't so helpful for you? If you're finding yourself constantly doom scrolling, that is one way that I think a lot of us are engaging our senses in a way that maybe isn't so helpful or um, so aware and bringing so much discernment. So contemplate on these things. I encourage you all to share in our community forum about what your insights are. Is very helpful as we've learned to be in right community. Yeah, and that part of that right community is sharing your own contemplations and then experiencing what other people are contemplating, because it gives us greater insight. We're all facets of the same jewel. And so being able to see that divine light bounce off and share is so wonderful. So